Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and today I'm joined by Elfbait, also known as Eli. How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I'm just a second. I'm getting like repeat off of my channel.
Oh
So,
yeah, something needs to be muted someplace.
yeah.
Uh,
All right.
it happens. It happens to the best of us. So you've been in the Nerdarchy community for a long time, the D&D community even longer, as well as the sculpting community, where you're a sculptor and also a producer of sculpts. But you are tiny, right?
Oh, I'm tiny, tinier than tiny. I mean, I even advertise my company, Loud Ninja Games, as a boutique. It's like it's not even an actual company. It's like it's a miniatures boutique.
That's still a company.
Yeah, yeah.
And looking over at the page, you've made a bunch of there's a lot of different sculpts over there. But you work in the 15 millimeter scale, and
Yeah,
D&D and like most tabletop games is like 28, I think.
Yeah, 28's the standard for most gaming, and it's also, I mean, it's the most lucrative. I mean, if I really wanted to turn into a business, I'd jump into that scale. 15 is more of a wargaming scale, and it's super popular because within its group in its own right, it's a niche of a niche of a niche. Um,
Yeah.
because you can get so much on the field and still have a battlefield look like a battlefield. That's why I like it.
Yeah.
So.
Do you get into there's Car Wars, but then there's a new one like Gas.
Gaslands?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh yeah, that one is so fun. When I got into. I've not played it, but I have a ton of cars built.
Nice.
I just went off the deep end. I was going into the thrift stores and buying bags of Matchbox cars, and
Yeah.
I got into the deeper science of modifying the cars, like figuring out how to drill the pins out of the bottom so you can take them apart and get the components. And yeah, it was crazy, but it's fun.
Although I feel like that's a hard. I mean, anything that's kind of tabletop now is a bit hard to do. I would be surprised if someone hasn't done it like on Tabletop Simulator or something now.
I'm sure somebody somewhere has.
Well, and you think about it, right? Like the premise behind that game is just grab your Matchbox cars and play this game.
Yeah, and depending on the Matchbox cars out there, I mean, there are some that already have guns on them and everything, and it's yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a WYSIWYG kind of a game, anyways, and it's, what you see is what you get, and you can bolt a couple of pieces of wire and a little square bit out of an old printer cartridge or something like that on there and call it a machine gun at that scale.
Yeah, yeah. Which scale would that be considered?
It's kind of nebulous because Matchbox cars are box scale, which is whatever the model will always fit the box that it's in. It's sort of around like there's not a miniature scale for it, but model scale it's around like 1/64th, something like that. But even still, you can take two cars next to like a little Mini Cooper is going to be as big as your Blazer.
Yeah.
So it gets hard to have the smaller cars in the game.
Yeah, I guess so. I haven't checked it out yet. I have a couple friends that are definitely into it, though.
It's definitely worth it. I mean, especially if you want just, I've heard you mention a few times, like minis are kind of hard because you don't want to get in and paint them. Well, you don't have to paint them, and you don't even have to paint them good because they could just be some scuzzy rat rod kind of a thing, and it'll still look good on the table.
Yeah. Also, I think it's kind of like the concept is kind of cool. Like, if you're playing an RPG and for whatever reason you wanted to go into like vehicles during it, instead of using like complex RPG rules that sometimes aren't that good, you could like mini game it.
Yeah, and it's super light too, so it's not going to divert a lot of attention, and you're not going to have to front load learning a new system or anything like that. So you could really jump in and use it on the side. I just turn it into Avernus battle wagons instead of race cars.
It's and also the like if you wanted that mini, which is a very cool mini, but it's also like $80 for one of them. You know, so if you wanted to field a bunch of them, yeah, it gets a little pricey.
There and in Matchbox stuff, there's so many weird cars that have like demonic features or dragon faces on them and stuff. I mean, you could easily find proxies for your demon rides and call it good. But
yeah, also the scale is slightly different between your Matchbox and the Avernus, because I think the Avernus
they're
model,
scaled to the miniatures, aren't they?
Yeah,
like 28 millimeter.
It holds like 3 or 4 minis, so
yeah, they're monsters. They're really nice, but those are what I kind of consider like premium assets for gaming.
Oh yeah. I mean,
I'm still a theater of the mind guy when it comes to role playing. So
yeah, I mean, even to just have one of them, is kind of cool. But it's also one of those things that's far less useful when you only have one. To like for like the cool scenes you might want to do in your game.
And it's super campaign specific.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, I've got this Avernus ride, and I'm going to use it in Avernus.
Yeah. And there's only one, right? There's only one model. There's a bunch of different ones you can do. And I'm sure if you like went over to the DM's Guild, you would find other ones that have been made as well. But conceptually, it's kind of cool. Like, I guess when me and Ted were talking about Avernus, like, you could run a whole campaign, just based off of the Hell Machines. Because who doesn't want to have a campaign with, motorcycle devil gangs?
I know in my one of my regular campaigns, I had the characters find a small chest of the soul coins.
Yeah.
And they don't know what they are yet. And they've got these coins that they just look like weird kind of iron coins, right?
And they're big too. They're like giant.
Yeah, they're like big, and they're like, oh, what are these? These must be special. And I'm like, yeah, they're super special. But you guys haven't even like thought about what they are.
You just acquired a bunch of souls of the damned.
Yeah, and the way that my barbarian player is going, that may become more appealing to.
Oh no.
He's got a pact with Dagon.
Yeah. He's gonna forge the Soul Queen armor out of it.
That would be cool.
Yeah, why not? So speaking of gaming, you also do some paid DMing as well, correct?
Yeah. So there's my local flag had an idea to start trying to build the community in there, and asked me to come in and start running games for him. But kind of a pay to play. It's definitely a nice side hustle. It's not gonna pay the bills, but it comes with some nice perks. And the people who have joined in and played, I mean, I've got a regular campaign going. They've stuck with me through 2 months of quarantine and are back playing now that we're able to get back into the store in small numbers. So, it's fun. It's no different for me than running a regular campaign. And these guys are kind of becoming my buddies, but I feel bad because I got to charge them to play. But it's a business. So.
You had mentioned before we got started, like it being a little bit harder to DM wearing the mask because you can't be quite as expressive.
Yeah, now that we're back in, we still have to follow the store rules, which is we can't have a big group, and which is fine because we're only 4 players and a DM, but we have to wear our masks while we're playing. And I didn't realize how much of my DMing style came from my face. So I'm having to resort to my hands, which is not a problem because that's like my second language anyways, is my hands. So, but yeah, it's interesting. And reading the players is what's really tricky, I think. I have to go completely on their eyes now. So
I just had a thought. You just need a stack of different masks with different graphics on them.
Character masks.
Yeah.
And now you meet the shopkeeper.
Yeah, pretty much.
And the demon lord. But I could just put a Japanese mempo on my face.
Yeah. Either that or all of your NPCs are now ninjas.
All my NPCs are ninjas. There we go. We need to switch games. We're actually just playing that's a standard D&D game. My regular Monday group is a whole nautical campaign.
So Kamo wants to know, how did you get the name Elfbait?
Ah, okay. So back when, in the days of yore, when second edition was a thing, uh,
The land of Thaco.
Yep, the last bastion of Thaco. We used to have this thing where we kept coming up with ideas, and then we'd see them in print in a gaming book or on a shelf, and it became this running gag that there were little elves everywhere, like listening to our ideas and sending them off to TSR and stuff, or even comic book companies, because we were big superhero role players and stuff too. And so the name Elfbait was a name that I just threw up when I decided to do a channel about when I tried to do my own channel, was to come up with this idea of a channel to help teach and learn, teach people D&D, how to be a DM, just general gaming discussion. And it seemed like a fitting name because I'm throwing ideas out there into the world to be taken by these elves. I'm baiting the elves. So unfortunately, it's also a thing for the elf on the shelf. And so any kind of search engine mechanic pulls up 8 million recipes on bait to bring the elf on the shelf to your house. So
you were a visionary. Who knew?
Yeah, but no, it all goes back to this goofy in-gag that we had back in the day.
You should have kept the challenge, just switched it to talking about Elf on the Shelf.
Oh God, no! I can't do that on a regular day.
You just combine Elf on the Shelf and D&D.
Either that or turn Elf on the Shelf into the elf into dress him like Legolas or something and have him going around my house doing hero stuff.
That would be cool.
I got a buddy who does his own version of Elf on the Shelf in November. He does Dragon November. I think it's a thing that's out there anyways. But he has the big Reaper undead dragon skeleton, and he goes and poses it around his house and takes pictures of it like the Elf on the Shelf folks do. It's like, it's getting into the cat food. It spilled the drink.
Oh man, it's stealing my booze.
Yeah, but Elfbait got to be pretty weird when I had a character that I made, a very specific superhero character, and then we in a very specific superhero team, and then I go into the local game store, game store / comic shop, and on the shelf is a comic with the same name, issue number 1, same name, and I pull it open and I'm like, and there's basically my character but a different color, like different costume color. It was an ice-based character. My character had what's called black ice and had black ice powers, but this character was like blood ice and had red ice powers, and but the name of the team was the same. I'm like, did I see a preview of this, or is this just such an obvious combination of name and name?
I feel like there's a lot of times that I've kind of heard those stories, and I just chalk it up to we're all nerds and we like the same things.
It's parallel development. It's like you just, there's only so many ideas, and we're all going to come to that same nerdy conversation.
Yeah, there's only so many streams of consciousness, there's the stream of consciousness we all pull from it.
Yeah, I know some of my best ideas and thoughts have come up from the coffee shop visits on your way to or on your way back from a convention. You just seem to be bubbling with ideas, but they never come to fruition.
So, do you have online games going on as well right now?
Yeah, my regular Monday game. That's an online game. As soon as we got locked down, I bit the bullet, loaded up Roll20 for the first time, and figured out the bare basics. Yeah. We're not using dynamic lighting, and I'm not building, dynamic maps or anything, but I'm using dice rollers. And at the time, we were playing Call of Cthulhu, which is my number 2 favorite game at this point. And we played that for a good while, and it was really neat because I could throw up a picture of a spooky graveyard, or here's the mansion you come up to, or I would make props using newspaper generators, and I could throw it up there and the players could read it, because I'd been doing that in the tabletop version before when we were just doing it in person. So I got that, and then I'm also playing in my little brother started up a game, and when I say little, he's 42. But he started up a game in St. Louis and invited me to come and play, and it's been fun. I'm back to playing an actual PC character as a player after decades of not playing one.
Your little brother will always be your little brother, even if they're bigger than you.
I still call him kiddo and kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, hey kid, how's it going?
I'm sure he loves that.
I'm pretty sure he does.
So now that you're finally getting to play as a player, what do you play?
I am playing a Battlemaster fighter. I absolutely just dig the class. But it's funny because I had the concept for the character and I just built the character to concept and it just worked out as a good character.
Yeah.
I came in as a, first level fighter with like a 19 armor class and I'm like, because feat combination, variant human, and I'm really digging it. And I use it to play an agile swordsman, kind of a sword and buckler fighter wearing medium armor rather than just some battlefield boss or anything like that. But it's a really versatile subclass. I dig it.
Fighter in this edition is good. I mean, there's definitely options there. I mean, you have the easiest version, which is the champion, where you don't have to think about a whole lot. But I've seen them played well in my games. Getting extra crits is not a bad thing. Oh
no, not at all. And it's nice to have fighters that are distinguished by more than just their weapon and armor choice.
Yeah. Previous editions, it's like, oh, you have a new player. What do you make them a fighter just so it's easy? I've seen that done plenty of times. In this edition, you could go with fighter, but you still have a decent amount of choices and ways to distinguish your character.
Yeah, it's better that way, I think, because fighters really were so basic in older editions.
Yes. Your basic character.
Yeah, but I mean, under old school philosophy, though, that gave you a lot of room to just build your character based on your own imagination. I mean, your fighter was completely a product of your imagination and the weapons you chose. I mean, if he was the hero of blah 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 or the outlaw of whatever, that was all backstory.
Yeah.
And all character development.
Although I guess in AD&D, if you were a magic user, it didn't matter much either because you only really had one spell you're going to cast per day.
That was, I think, I would say, I don't think I ever played a straight wizard in any of the old school stuff. I just couldn't handle playing a character that took 10 levels before I was even really defined as a character.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because in AD&D you had your the titles, and you weren't a wizard until 10th level.
Well, yeah, you didn't have proficiencies or anything like that to like help flesh out your character, and your spell list was so small, and then your weapon selection was even limited. So you really were just, okay, I'm gonna cast a couple of spells and I'll be over here. You guys let me know when you're done.
I like that they narratively wrote that into Dragonlance later, like the weapon selection for the wizard. Like I forget what the story was, but
I don't recall myself.
But at some point, the wizards weren't allowed to carry weapons, and then there was a wizard. Like there's like a short story about the wizard, why they changed that rule because they were left without spells and completely defenseless.
Yeah, I remember even as an early gamer, it annoyed the crap out of me that wizards couldn't carry swords. I'm like, the archetypical wizard Gandalf is whipping a sword around like there's no tomorrow.
Some might argue he was better with the sword than he was with spells.
Well, he's really only a fifth level magician, a fifth level wizard. There was that breakdown that examines all the magic you ever see him actually cast, and like all of this could be a fifth level wizard.
Yeah, I mean it's like when his power spell is like pyrotechnics.
Really think he was actually a rogue pulling off a really big scam with 5 levels in wizards. So because he was always like, I'll just keep these trolls talking until the sun comes up, and I'll time this charge to where when they look to the east, the sun comes up. Yeah.
It was definitely a different type of adventuring party. That's why I find those books boring now when I think back at them, because it's like most of it was like runaway.
Yeah, It wasn't until third edition, I think, that they finally tried to put an actual mechanical description on limitations for the armor and equipment by having it to where the metal messed up their magic or something like that.
Yeah, they couldn't do the complex gestures, so then they had a percentage to fail when they cast wearing armor.
And something like the amassing of all of that metal was like a weird like conductor for magic. At least they tried. I could get behind that. If you're going to give me logic that says why my wizard can't, other than just because rules.
And then they also finally got the crossbow.
Yeah.
So, which was still kind of like lame.
We had clerics could only use bludgeoning weapons back in the day.
Yeah, well, in third edition, what they changed it to, like, you could use, it wasn't bludgeoning anymore, but it was a limited weapon selection, and then it was like you could use the weapon of your god.
Yeah, and that was better.
Yeah.
But I'm just like thinking, how many priests do you see not running around with their ceremonial dagger at least?
I do miss the spontaneous casting from third edition, but only for the druid.
I never played third edition enough to really get too familiar with it because I held out on third a long time. I was so crusty over the change from second to third.
Yeah,
because second for me was just AD&D with more, and that's kind of how we played it. But I think I got into third edition maybe 1 or 2 years before they changed editions. And so I played it briefly for a little bit, and then fourth came out, and I have to admit I'm one of those guys who kind of gave in to the negativity that was thrown at it fourth, and maybe a little salty because I just got into third. I'm like,
yeah,
darn it.
Third actually had a pretty good run.
Oh yeah,
so you resisted for a long time.
It didn't stop me from buying a lot of books though. Because once I finally got into it, I'm like, oh, there's so much.
Yeah,
this open gaming license is amazing.
Yeah, that's a bit ugly. If you came in late and then felt compelled to buy all the books because there were so many books. I mean, there were so many books just from put out by Wizards of the Coast at that time. So the spontaneous casting was if you were a good cleric, you could channel positive energy and just use your spells to heal without preparing the spell. If you were a evil aligned cleric, you could channel negative energy and cause wounds instead. And then druids had I think it was called Call Nature's Ally or Summon Nature's Ally. It's whatever it was. It wasn't what it is now. It was named something different. So you could do that. To me, I just thought it was funny because any druid I played, basically, whenever they used that ability, they would just do the Tarzan call.
Hey,
and have animals come running.
Tarzan's a great archetype for a druid character.
But
barbarian.
But they've kind of like modeled fifth out off of that too, with kind of like I feel like with the spells known. Or not your spells known, the way they prepare the spells, where before it was very specific. It's like you would prepare, cure wounds once, twice, 3 times. Right now it's just like a blanket, one spell. As long as you have slots, you can pick from this list. So it's giving it a lot more flexibility. And cantrips, way better. It's nice to always feel like a wizard, even when you're out of your good spells.
Yeah, it's definitely nice that wizards don't stand around, double checking their spell book while everybody else finishes the fight.
Yeah.
I would love to see more cantrips come into the game though, because I feel like that wizards sort of still end up a little samey at a certain. The same thing with warlocks. Eldritch Blast. Blast.
Yeah. Well, the wizard has a bunch, but yeah, there are definitely some that are more popular than others. What I would have loved to see with the warlock is different builds based off of different cantrips. Like, if that's going to be their bread and butter, sure, let it, but, give them eldritch invocations that would work with different paths. So it wouldn't always just be the Eldritch Blast.
Like ways to change up Eldritch Blast. Like, okay, so
No,
instead
no,
of
no.
a
Change up different cantrips.
oh, different cantrips. Yeah,
Because I mean, they kind of have that with Eldritch Blast, where you can customize it.
yeah,
Except for when every single warlock does it, it's not very unique.
true.
So at least if they had, 5 or 6, different paths that you could go down, and how it's affected by your choices, might be interesting, might be cool. It's hard though. Eldritch Blast is really good.
Yeah, Warlock is one of those characters. I think one of those classes I think was needed in D&D for a long time, and they kind of tinkered around with it even in AD&D when they had like the witch class in Dragon Magazine. I think that was kind of an early attempt to do something warlockish.
The warlock came late the 3rd edition too as a class.
Yeah, I think they've been working around sort of a third or fourth, I guess you call it, if you include, or fifth if you can include druid and stuff, but like a third, like another arcane caster that was not.
Yeah,
so,
how to justify it so it wasn't like, oh, this is just another wizard.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of the subclass concept in 5th edition. I really actually enjoy because it allows a lot of really relatively easy homebrew options too, if you want to, on how to make different classes. And we've also started to see them mashing up class types through subclasses where, all right, this is sort of like a cleric, but he kind of has fightery stuff, or here's a sorcerer who does sort of cleric-y stuff,
It is one of the easiest additions to homebrew for, especially like the classes, because all you have to do is look and see, well, what levels do I actually have to worry about, and you're usually just adding 3 or 4 things to a class anyway.
And we're far enough into the game too that homebrewing a subclass could be as easy as going through the other subclasses that are out there for that same class.
Yeah.
And reskinning, retheming, or subbing out parts of existing abilities. It's like there's so much to work with already. Character races too. I mean, you can pick and pull from all these character races, recombine them to fit just about any theme you might have.
Have you homebrewed any classes in your games?
Not that's been played right now. I tend to just work on them for the heck of it anyways. I'm working on 2 bard colleges right now. I've got one that's kind of touches on necromancy through a bard.
Okay.
And the idea is that he's learned the secrets of the dead and attuned him, so he kind of communicated with the dead and has a relationship with the dead. And kind of got the idea when I was thinking about professional mourners in various cultures, how they are performers, but they're performers in the context of death, and what you could do with D&D with that. In this case, instead of where the College of Creation has the animate object, it just so happens that lines up with really cool ideas for, say, give them summon undead spirit at a certain level where they can call upon, not pulling a spirit out of the ground or out of death like you would say do traditional necromancy, but asking their friend the ghost to help them.
Yeah, so we oh yeah, here it is. I didn't think it'd be this easy to find. So we did a video, well, it appears 4 years ago, singing you to death the Thanatologist bard. So a Thanatologist is a thing, and I remember Ryan bringing it up, and so we kind of did the video on the these bards that would go around and sing it basically at funerals and for death rites.
See, it's just pulling stuff from real world ideas. I mean, you're sitting there, you got this idea. I mean, another one, the other bard college I'm working on is based on The Devil Went Down to Georgia.
Yeah,
and it's the idea of a bard who gets his abilities through pacts from some other being. It's there's lots of wiggle room.
It's today on the channel we put up a video about playing gnolls.
Yeah, I just saw that before I came on.
And somebody pointed out that so Nord in their Revenge of the Horde, they have them as player characters, and I completely forgot about that. So now I have to remember to go back and look at that again and see what Nord did with them.
It was like we were talking earlier with Elfbait, the whole origin of the name. I mean, these ideas are coming to people all the time. Yeah. And so we're not the only one. Like you and I both came up, I and your group came up independently with this idea of, bardic death singers.
Yeah.
From almost the same source material. And, and the whole, I'm sure I'm not the only guy who's had an idea for coming up with a bard who gets his abilities through making deals with the devil, or some other supernatural being.
Rip Charlie.
I also I'm doing a barbarian that touches on necromancy. It's the path of the path of the Death Walker.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, it's sort of a variation on the ancestor thing, but in this case, he's like, spins that death relationship, that spirit relationship into a new twist. So
Kamo has a question. Any favorite monsters or spells to throw at your players?
For me, monster-wise, favorites. I do a lot of homebrewing of monsters. Very few of my monsters come out stock, but it's going to be a weird one. I love throwing random owlbears at people. If you're going to camp in the woods, there's probably going to be an owlbear. One of my parties had to travel through this tunnel to get through a mountain, and there was an owlbear in the tunnel. And they were like,
your world has a rampant owlbear problem.
Exactly. Mad wizards really need to keep their creations in check. But no, I like owlbears. Spells. I'm going to be the first one to admit my adventures tend to be a little low magic. I mean, maybe it's too much of the old school sword and sorcery mindset, but if you're running into somebody magical, he's probably the wizard, not a wizard for that area. I love coming up with traps and puzzles and stuff and obstacles before spells. So
I think I use ankegs excessively, or bullets. Both of those two are some of our favorite classic monsters.
Those are great because they come up out of the ground out of nowhere.
Yeah, that might be it. That might be why.
You're traveling down the road and bullet.
Well, the other thing too is the bullet is just so cool looking.
Yeah, all off of a cheesy toy.
Essentially. So, Brian Smith, a banshee wailing bardic tradition would be cool. Actually, that is actually cool, and I think it narratively, it's super cool. The thought that a bard or a group of bards decide to begin studying banshees, because of their origin, and I believe don't they usually have something to do with singing anyway?
Well, yeah, and they're also connected really intrinsically to Irish funerary tradition and death tradition. So that even spins right back into the two bard colleges that we came up with. That would be an interesting option to make a bard college instead of getting that.
The College of Melancholy.
Yeah, it's all variations on death.
It's a super emo.
Well, it's like we have the grave clerics and then the death clerics.
Yeah,
they're both variations on that same theme. So I that's another cool thing with subclasses, I think, is that you can start seeing those variations on the same theme.
Yeah, I feel like we're still missing a lot from cleric. I mean, that being said, cleric has the most subclasses, but everything that's a domain from previous editions would essentially be a subclass.
There are so many good domains out there on the interwebs. I remember when I first got into 5th edition, building pantheons, I was just pulling domains left and right. I pulled travel as a domain from somebody's homebrew and incorporated it into my world, where my campaign world has the adventurer equivalent of Saint Christopher is this god of travelers who's become the patron saint of adventurers also. The patron deity of adventurers. And so it's common to have adventurers have a medallion or something to this guy, even though they may have another god. You always make sure that when you're adventuring, you've got your amulet to the god of travel and to protect your journey.
Well, that kind of speaks to how civilizations were with multi-god pantheons. They didn't just revere one god. It was that's the whole reason. It's how they explained everything, right? Food, rain, whatever it is, they explained it with a deity, and you definitely wanted to be on that deity's good side to make sure that you kept getting the thing you needed, or not to be destroyed by the thing.
That's the one thing I miss from second edition, is that they had clerics and then they had priests, and the cleric was the generalist who kind of was worshiper of the whole pantheon.
Yeah.
And then priests were devoted to particular gods. Because it's hard for me as a DM, and also a fan of a history buff, an anthropology buff, a mythology buff, to really reconcile some guy going out there and I only pray to death, one aspect of my entire religion.
Yeah.
I mean, there are going to be those people, but where's the generalist?
Yeah.
Where's the the higher level guy, or the guy who's just like, hey, come in, we got a nook with a statue to each guy in our temple.
I think out of sheer laziness, we've done a lot of that, to be honest with you. It's like, here we have our non-denominational Church of the Light that has has nooks for various deities where people can come and pay homage to them.
Yeah, I if you're building realistic belief structures, it's easy to do that and sit there and say, okay. And you might have places that are more important or revered or venerated as a place to one deity. Real world had temples to Athena and Zeus and all of that. And I think that kind of stuff is really what informed D&D belief systems, as opposed to, but anybody who was worshiping Athena still very much worshipped all of the other gods. You might go to her temple when you really, really needed her particular blessing, but you're still praying to everybody else. So. Well,
yeah, I mean, when you attribute the gods to everything in everyday life, you don't want to piss off or alienate anyone in particular. I think in 5e it's not really too hard to have a cleric that worships a pantheon as opposed to a specific deity. I mean, the only thing is you'd probably just want to pick a domain that has a more of a generic feel, generic and general feel to it, than
like
when it's
light. Light or something like that.
Well, no, light is actually the opposite, because that one's super specific. That is like that's the go boom cleric kind of. It seems like it should be though.
That's the blasty domain.
Yeah, like I don't know. Nature might be a little bit more generic. You have to pick through them. Like obviously, like things like grave and death, you would want to stay away from. And forge, like those ones that are super specific, but I'm sure you can find some that'll fit. Like I'm surprised we still don't have like domains for each of the elements.
Yeah, and you could do that, and I'm sure it's actually been done somewhere. I think Cobalt did a big elemental supplement when they were doing their magic blurbs.
Yeah, they did a bunch of them. Most of those were all arcane now.
Yeah. I know I picked that one up, the elemental one up, because it had some genie stuff in it, and there's the answer to that favorite monster. I don't get to use it a lot. Genies. I love genies. So I love genies, although they're a little too powerful to throw in on a regular basis. But
they can make great NPCs.
Oh yeah, they're good quest givers too. The second leg of my current nautical campaign involved a merit, the start of it. So we started up, it was a game for my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what do kids really like? Pirates, right? And the name of the campaign, Vagabond Seas, came from the fact that they were all a bunch of street urchins and stuff, and that petered out. And when I had my Monday group, we were looking to do a regular D&D game. I'm like, I've got all this stuff already fleshed out for this campaign, and I got 2 of the players were still in it, my wife's character and my nephew's character. But so when we started up again, they all woke up on a longboat in the middle of the ocean, with all of their equipment, and floating off the side of this big old creepy pirate ship. And this Merit appears out of the water and says, "Okay, you're going to do this thing or you're going to die." And it was kind of a strong hand, but I wanted to start them out dramatically.
Yeah.
But that Merit ended up coming back at the end of that arc. They got him to sort of turn on the guy who he was working for. So it was, like you said, a cool NPC.
Huh. Speaking of mirrors, Doug says trivia in the Near and Middle East, hyenas are regarded as physical incarnations of jinns.
That sounds logical because they're creepy and at night. Because, I mean, if you ever heard, I mean, I can't imagine being out on the savannah at night and like hearing hyenas. If you ever need if you ever needed a solid reason why a culture would develop the concept of evil spirits, it would be hyenas at night, or an owl.
Yeah.
If you've ever been camping and got woke up in the middle of the night by an owl, and I remember sitting there thinking one night, imagine being the first people to walk through the woods, and you go to sleep one night, and you hear that crap in the trees.
Well, I mean, that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. Is just us trying to interpret the world.
Yeah. I know. It's funny. I remember at one job I worked at, sitting there at lunch talking about the hardships we went through walking home from school, right? Yeah. Bullies, dogs, and this guy from Kenya comes in. He's like, "This one time when I was a kid and I came home from school, on my porch there was a lion." I'm like, "All right, you win. I can't beat a lion."
Yeah, absolutely not.
And his mom would tell him to be home before dark, or else the monkeys would get him.
Yeah.
Because of baboons and stuff like that.
Oh man, yeah, that is definitely.
He may have been pulling our leg.
Yeah.
But
sounds realistic enough to me. And
well, I'm sure we were all embellishing our tales of bullies and dogs too. But
well, baboons and mandrills are freaking vicious.
Oh yeah, it's gnarly.
I remember going to the Six Flags as a kid. And if you had a certain kind of car, you couldn't go through the safari because the apes would tear off the roof. If you had what is it called, a ragtop?
Yeah, the ragtops, convertibles. Yeah,
they would rip it up.
That makes sense.
So that you were advised to not do that.
I mean, we got the extortion monkeys in India. They'll steal I was watching this thing, and they stole this lady's purse, and then they ransomed it back to her for fruit.
Yeah, nature is a great inspiration for D&D games for sure. Like any of that stuff, or was it what was it? I saw something about roving gangs of monkeys taking over towns and having turf wars.
It's happened in multiple places, in multiple countries, where they have large monkey populations that are used to having people feed them and leave stuff around, and also rat populations in some of the cities where there's just not enough trash getting dropped around anymore.
Yeah.
And so the rats are having to resort to cannibalism and stuff like this.
That's
the apocalypse.
Rats are holding your cat hostage for food.
One of the miniatures I'm sculpting is actually I've got one of the lines I sculpted myself is all post-apocalyptic weirdness. Think Gamma World type stuff. Yeah. And I've got, from living in Washington, I've got inspired a lot of inspiration. I've got one range that's a bunch of mutant clams.
Mutant clams. So what does a mutant clam look like?
Oh, they're humanoid because, of course, in that context of the old school apocalypse, everything develops, bipedalism, right? But
is it essentially like a humanoid body with a clam on top of its
No,
shoulders.
no, that would be way too Ivers, the local, fish place. But in my game that I ran them in, they actually worshipped Ivor Haglund as their like sort of deity savior, and that's the. I don't know if you know anything about Washington or Seattle, but Ivor Haglund was like this. He has the big fish chain around here, and his big thing was acres of clams, and he had these running clams on the beach, kind of a thing. And so that became the mythology in the post-apocalypse. They worshipped Ivor Haglund because he created acres for the clams.
Not acres of clams, acres for the clams. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the acres for clams, and then but in that same thing, one of the other things I'm sculpting, talking about terrible things roaming the cities and stuff like that, is I got mutant pigeons that have basically evolved back into terror birds. They're like bipedal, flightless things that run around the streets attacking people.
I think the 4th edition Gamma World, or the Gamma World based off of the 4th edition D&D system, like the adventure that came with it is like as these humanoid chickens that have taken over what used to be a chicken processing plant.
Yeah, that would be in line. I mean, did you ever catch the old? Remember After the Bomb, the expansion off the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Palladium game?
Yes,
they had some of that stuff. They had a whole adventure in there that was based on Animal Farm, but with mutant animals.
Sounds appropriate. Yeah,
pigs with machine guns and flamethrowers.
We played a session of that. It actually exists online somewhere, I believe, still.
What's interesting is after they lost the TMNT license, they republished it without the TMNT stuff.
Okay.
And it's also proto Rifts. A lot of people don't really pick up on that, but it is proto Rifts.
What do you mean?
So Rifts came from Palladium also, of course, but the basic story in After the Bomb is very much early Rifts. You have a big cataclysm that creates monstrosities and oddities, and then an empire of humanity that's like against everybody, that doesn't like anything that's humans and uses dogs as foot soldiers. Mm-hmm. That's proto Rifts.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, Palladium. Sigh.
Great ideas, just an impossible to play game system.
Well, it's funny. We were like having a discussion about it internally, and Doug's like, yeah, but that hasn't been around for a while. Like, I'm like, no, dude, they still sell those books, and it is the same book they wrote 20 years ago or however long it was.
And they're still making new stuff for Rifts.
Yeah, like that system has not evolved or changed.
They've repackaged and republished editions and stuff too, but they're still the one thing that you could always get from Palladium books that I did like about them is the soft cover format and the 400-page count, and it was just packed full of info. You got stuff. There was so much crunch and background in Rifts that, or in anything Palladium, that you could easily lift it for another game. Like if you took their old Palladium fantasy role-playing game, there is an entire gaming world built there for you that's super rich, kind of old school flavor, and you could easily 5th edition that.
Yeah, I find it's easy to 5th edition a lot of the older stuff without a ton of like conversion.
Yeah, one thing I really liked the old Talislanta game. So,
I've never checked that out, although Doug has mentioned it a few times.
If you want 800 different character classes, I'm exaggerating, but it's because they didn't do class; they did race plus career.
Okay.
So, and the core rulebook gave you maybe 100 or so archetypes to start with, but you could build your own. And it was so many different variations on races all living on this one planet.
I think at this point, even though I play so much D&D, and we talk about D&D all the time, I actually prefer classless systems.
Oh, me too.
And skill systems. They're just better. Yes, Rifts. There is a Savage World Rifts. I actually backed it, and I have all the digital stuff someplace. We have never touched it though.
Yeah, Savage Worlds not a system that ever resonated for me, so I never got to play. But I was aware that they did a Talislant for it. They also did a Rifts one. That amazed me because that was the first time I've ever seen Palladium let anybody else touch their product.
Yeah.
Except besides Grenadier, who did the miniatures for them back in the day when they attempted to do Rifts miniatures.
Well, things can evolve. What is the other really generic system that everyone talks? GURPS. Yeah, I've never messed with GURPS. Is GURPS still around?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I see it around.
Well,
I liked their genre books. Especially their mythology books.
Yeah.
Because when you bought a history or a mythological setting book for GURPS, you were at the same time buying an actual textbook in a way, because they really went encyclopedic on it. And I loved that their mythology books always had a way. They had a section on interpreting the myths in a historical bent. Like, how do you take this myth of a centaur and turn it into something that would be in a historical campaign, or Cyclopses or whatever? It was always kind of neat to see.
Oh, that was a stupid question. Of course GURPS is still around. That's Steve Jackson Games.
Yeah.
But it's, it's another one that I've never checked out. Although also, like, what little I know of it does not incentivize me to check it out either. Like any of those any game that is still kind of modeled off of the way the games were made in the 80s is just like, I don't know.
As much as I like them, I understand the problems for 80s games. And, they don't shine very well mechanically.
Well, that's just it. It was like there was a lot of mechanics for mechanics' sake, and charts and tables was like a big thing, so it's a lot of stuff to memorize or know or reference.
Yeah. In some cases they were the opposite, though. They were like, here's some core rules and everything else is left up to the interpretation of the players and the DM.
What do you think is a good example of that?
Well, I think in a lot of cases AD&D was a good example of that. While it did have a lot of crunchy rules, there was a lot of it that they just expected to be adjudicated by the game master and for the players to figure out.
So yeah, no, I would agree with that. AD&D was a lot like that, but then it had like specific weird rules that made no sense, like THAC0.
I went back through THAC0. Yeah, we don't even go there. But it's so funny. I went through the player's handbook for AD&D when I got in 3rd edition, and I was looking through it. I'm like, this was a rule then? I've never used this rule ever. I didn't even know this rule existed. I can't even remember what it was. I'm like, this is something that's here in 3rd edition, but it was here back in AD&D, and we just never knew it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that too. When we went back and did we did a video on like healing through the editions. Yeah, it was kind of fun to go and look and see what the different rules were, and it's like 5e pretty simple, 4e even simpler, and then it just got more complex, and then you got to 1A, and it was like you get a hit point back a day. That's it.
Yes, sword and sorcery healing.
Yeah.
You also look at Fireball, and the AD&D entry for Fireball is a mini physics lesson.
Yeah, there was a lot of fun things like that as well. Fun.
Exactly. The almighty fun. The fun with a capital F.
Yeah. Putting the FU in fun.
Exactly. THAC0 was weird.
What kind of games do you like to run or play? Do you have because you've mentioned several times, more low magic and more
is that what kind of campaigns for D&D? Or?
Yeah.
So my D&D games tend to be pretty grounded. I have a hard time running, fantasy land. I can't run Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms, as neat as it is, I can't interface with that world. It's just too magical. And it's not that I don't want magic in my games. I just want the magic to count, and I want the wonder to be there. It's so hard nowadays to get people to concede to playing a game that's more grounded and has limitations. Like, okay, we're going to play this, but I need just these races. Let's just only do core races because why can't I play this? I'm like, because I want, when you encounter it, I want it to be magical and special. And, But yeah, it's I like the grounded games. So like when I make a campaign world and you walk into a city, it's in my head I already know like what their economy is like, or who they trade with, what's informed them. Um, but yeah, and the magic is there. But when you find it, it's gonna seem magical. I also like to run a lot of folklore level stuff through my games. I love the Fae, so it's often where you'll go into peasant villages and there'll be all sorts of weird, like, why are they putting, I'll talk about them putting dishes of milk out by the hearth before they shut down the inn. And then when the players get up in the morning, there's a basket of dead rats and spiders on a table, in the middle of the inn where the local brownies and stuff have cleaned it up or whatever. Where'd the brownie go? It's not in D&D anymore.
So, real quick, Dave brings something in the chat. I learned A&D initiative inside and out for Gary account, but the player said we just roll a d6. I'm pretty sure I remember rolling a d6 as well.
We always rolled a d10 because there were like, was it? It was the way I learned it. Somebody had broken it down along with the math of turns versus rounds.
I think the d10 is the appropriate die.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. But so it was kind of weird, like learning AD&D and 1A, because like it was just like one guy knew the rules, found some people to play, and he just played however they told you to for the most part.
My experience was very different than that. It was a whole bunch of us who sort of as a committee figured out how to play D&D. We had books and some of us had played in games. But I started when I was 8 and probably didn't get it. And then we had a couple of friends who were in 6th grade who were playing it. And they knew it better. But yeah, we would just cobble it together. I know that one of the guys we played with, he had an initiative tracker where he would actually had a set of squares with 10 squares, and when you rolled your initiative, he would put a token down there, and that was the exact segment in the round that you acted on.
Yeah.
And then if you cast a spell that took X number of segments, he would alter your initiative for when your spell went off. That was kind of cool. It was fiddly, but hey, he's the DM. That's his deal.
Very fiddly. And
that's back when I still played characters.
That's just how it was.
Yeah. Like I used to always have for the longest time I had my player characters start with special gifts or traits, and it was funny, kind of cool to see that come back in Theros. I'm like, in second edition, I had a D100 chart that you rolled on, and that was the something that your character started out with beyond his class. It was kind of back in AD to try and make them special. And it's like you got your family sword, or you have a dark fate, or you have some extra gold, or you have a guardian angel or whatever, you're destined, or you have +1 strength because your father, your lineage has a troll in it somewhere or something like that. You're troll blooded.
Oh, you know what? It's good to think of it. I played AD&D not that long ago, but I don't remember what we rolled for initiative. So
there are many things that I've committed to memory, and initiative in AD&D is not one of them.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking I should probably remember this. It wasn't that long. Well, I guess it's about a year now.
But you played it on the fly between all the 5th edition.
That's true. Yeah, between everything else. Well, at D&D in the Castle, Stefan Bergorni was there, and he was running, and he only plays AD&D 1st edition, sort of, right? But I think that's like how we all played 1st edition anyway. It was like sort of that game.
Yeah, anybody's early edition game. The game was so bare bones that it became your edition.
Yeah. So
I mean, if you really wanted to be special and interesting, and
which it was kind of cool, especially because the way Stefan runs things, he has like his giant castle set up. Yeah. So it was
one of the coolest things to happen in 2nd edition was blank monster sheets in the Monsters Compendium.
Yeah.
Oh man, I photocopied the crap out of that. I had my own binder. I'm like, this is my monster manual, and my players would see me pull that out, and they're like, oh man, it's an Eli monster.
Yeah. Well, at a certain point, they were just selling them as binders.
Yeah.
And also, they would sell, like, you could get the binders, but then certain monster manuals were smaller, so it didn't even come with the binder. It was just the pages to put in your binder.
Well, they made that giant 3-ring binder as the first one you bought.
Yeah.
And it came with basically all the basic monsters. And from there on, all the rest of them were done shrink wrapped, and they would have the monster sheets, but then they would have like dividers in them that had basically like the covers of Dragon magazines on them is what I could always figure the art came from. But like the Al-Qadim one was really cool. They had gone back through all their art and found all their genie art and all their elemental art and stuff, and all their Middle Eastern style Persian art, and put it on the dividers. But I liked that format, honestly, because it was the first time you really started to see every monster get a single page or a 2-page spread where the monsters weren't sharing space on a page.
Yeah. And it was definitely part of the evolution. It was definitely cool. I wish I still owned all that stuff, but I've gotten rid of so much D&D stuff over the years.
Same.
And gaming stuff in general.
A lot of it just didn't survive, the move out from parents into roommate life. Yeah. And then when I left my roommate life, a good half my gaming stuff didn't go with me. I just left it at the roommate house. I'm like, I'll come back and get it later. Got married.
That happens. Life just devours that stuff.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do? So we were up on the hour already.
If you can believe that. Where'd it go?
Where'd it go? Any final thoughts before we head out?
Just make use of the time you have nowadays. If you have time, if you're not playing games, think about games, build games. It's a great time to build a campaign. If you're a DM, it's a great time to come up with cool character concepts if you're a player. So that way, when we all get back together, you'll be better prepared.
I just want to thank you for coming on. Appreciate chatting with you. It's been a while. So it's good to catch up. And to everyone else, until next time, stay nerdy.
Later, folks.